forget to rate our show and subscribe.
Before we begin this podcast, if you or someone you know is in crisis or needs emotional support, there are tools that can help. So get yourself a pen and paper or open a note-taking app on your phone or computer. Feel free to pause this episode while you get yourself ready. The episode starts at 1 minute and 52 seconds. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. You can text 45645, which is coming in the fall of 2023. In Canada, you can also call 988, the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. The Trans Lifeline in Canada is 1-877-330-6366. And in the United States, 1-877-565-8860, or call 911. You are not alone, and you do not have to be alone. I would like to honor and recognize the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations on whose territory I live, work, and play. Welcome to We Are the ADHD Family podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am passionate about removing barriers for others through creating connections and building on strengths and practical problem solving. I am married to Siobhan, a parent of 2 wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. I want you to feel like you have power and hope. And now, into the episode. One night, I was reading a Sesame Street book to Mackenzie, and I was doing the Count's voice. We're in our bed, Siobhan's almost asleep. I get to the magic number, which was 15, and usually I action Mackenzie to go boom, and it's usually pretty gentle. Then I heard boom! Unfortunately, Mackenzie was about a foot from Siobhan's face. I wasn't expecting it, and Siobhan was no longer almost asleep. This is the next part of my conversation with Melissa Madison. Melissa was Owen's grade 2 teacher. We are discussing practical ways that parents and teachers can work together to navigate the system and how to be more effective advocates. If you want to get more into Melissa's background, go back to part 1. In the previous episode, Melissa and I talked about what we both remember when my wife and I advocated for Owen, looking back and how our approach made her feel. How Melissa doesn't want kids to fall through the cracks, and that it stops with her. I hope you enjoy the next part of the conversation. This is where I think, as a parent, if someone isn't sure what to do, or a teacher isn't necessarily sure what to do, and I think there are times when it's valid to say, if I was a teacher, I don't know. As a parent, it's like, okay, who can I talk to next? Where can I go next? And I mean, sure, you could always set a little default process in your brain to, talk to the principal, but it might be worth finding out who the other roles in the schools are and being aware of what they are. And I mean, just like you said, there's no manual for being a parent. There's no manual for a lot of things that we have to do, and which is I just find really funny. It's all how we sort of come up with this on the fly and who we are. It ties into our personalities a lot of the time. So, there's nothing to stop a parent from, I guess, asking those other questions and from asking those other questions and staying curious as well. I think my advice for any parent would be, don't give up if something isn't quite working out, don't give up. Far from it. Go and find out, what can I do next? This avenue didn't work. Okay, but what are the questions I'm left with, and what are the answers that I'm seeking, even if you don't agree with the answer that you just got?
Sure.
And I know with us, that was after you went, you had your family stuff that happened, and you had left partway through the year, and we had the new teacher, who I loved. We thought she was fantastic. What was great is that she was willing to listen.
Yes.
And we were trying to help her with everything that we had seen. And she was trying to do the same thing, feeding the information back to us because we were concerned. And Owen did have such a rough grade too. And I remember back before the school year started, and I wrote this email to you, and I was not expecting to write it, but it was the weirdest experience of saying, here are all the things that you should be watching out for as that. And I remember giving it to her. I want to say her name. God knows I desperately do, but I haven't talked to her, so I just don't want to put her in that situation because she hasn't proved it. But she's awesome. I loved her. I love her. I think she's great. And just the fact that she was open to sit there and talk with us, great. Let's do it. Let's take care of that.
Yeah.
I think one thing we can definitely say, and it was funny because this is really the first thing I wrote down because I was going to establish it off the bat, but my sense is that some parents have an expectation or think that the teacher can diagnose a student, but that is flat out not the case at all. Define the role of a teacher.
That's a really big question. And I think that, so, I mean, I can get philosophical about pretty much anything. But when we say the role of a teacher, there's definitely a difference between what I think you're asking versus how I interpret it. So, what I think you're asking is more of what's our responsibility, the job description kind of thing. And so, if we look at it from a super simplistic point of view, while we plan and prepare lessons, we are constantly researching and developing new teaching materials, new methodologies, new strategies for things. We're always assessing, evaluating, we're reporting, we're communicating. We have administrative duties like photocopying, phone calls, outside agency reports, staff meetings, all of that stuff, right? So when I look at that, I go, okay, well, that's what a teacher does. But very rarely are teachers just what they do. Teachers become who they are, or being a teacher becomes a part of the soul of most educators. And so there's an interesting, I think it's Latin, and it's an educational law, and it's called in loco parentis. And so it's what it means that it's in educational law. It's under our teacher standards when we get our teaching certificate and all of that. We have to actually sign that loco parentis means in place of a parent. And so how it's defined is that the teacher stands in a position of a caring, responsible parent and unofficial guardian. So imagine the role of having loco parentis as your foundational, stance moving into the classroom, that we have to sign and say, yes, this is a part of being in the role of a teacher. And we have to make decisions every single day with that mind frame. So, when you think of it from a role base as opposed to a responsibility or a job description, we are constantly fostering students' positive identities, their mental and physical well-being. We have to keep them safe. We're helping them build their social and personal responsibilities, their intellectual development. We have to keep everyone super safe, both physically and emotionally. We are held accountable on and off duty for how we interact with the world, how we interact with parents. Very rarely in other professions, if someone is drinking at a pub, let's say, are they held accountable for what they're doing on their off hours? Whereas if a teacher's at a pub and becomes unruly, that can negatively impact the profession as a whole, and we can be disciplined for that. So it's interesting how that kind of how that affects teachers and how they embrace their roles. So, I know your question seems simple, but
It's not. No.
I mean, really, and with everyone's different personalities and their dedication to their profession and all of that, right? You're going to have teachers who just simply do their job description, and then you're going to have others who fully embrace the role. and that idea of loco parentis, and really take it seriously, the well-being of the children in their care, because it extends so much further than just planning and delivering lessons every day, right?
Well, and
So
at the same time too, I know I was shocked when I heard this one when I did my when I got my first aid, and I remember telling people that I had it. The What I found out was that, if you've got first aid in a school, the first aid is actually only there for staff. It's not there for students. You go see maybe the principal or something like that, but a lot of really the what's the word I'm trying to say? The role of that first aid person is only to look after staff, not students, and that was a shock to me. And it still sort of is.
mhm.
But, then again, kids go to the offices to get Band-Aids and stuff. And I mean, you do get serious injuries that happen at school.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, we've all seen our fair share of that. But, I think that line gets blurred.
Hmm.
And I think that's where, I think the same thing happens with the job description side of things versus what kind of happens in reality.
Hmm.
Right? Like that,
Oh
like you've got that meme, reality versus
yeah.
expectation.
Hmm. Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting. I feel like um, teachers walk a very interesting line in terms um, of what their role really means. So bear with me, this thought's downloading as I'm trying to articulate it. Um, so parents and society as a whole, they expect teachers to be experts. They expect teachers to know what they're doing, obviously. We're sending our most prized possessions to these people every day, right?
Yeah.
Most teachers spend more time with your children in a week than you do, right? These things happen all the time. And so um, there's this expectation that we are this on a pedestal in terms of being held to ethical and accountable behaviors in and off, on and off duty, um, and that we're supposed to know it all, so to speak, right? And know where to guide and know where to help and know what to do and all these things. And yet at the same time we are doubted and
Yeah.
we are crucified time and time and time again by parents and society as a whole, right? And it's funny, like I think back to like COVID, for instance, when all of that went down in 2020 and that initial shift happened to online learning and learning from a distance and whatever other coin phrase we used in that time. And it was interesting how quickly, when parents were handed the responsibility of doing a teacher's job, quote unquote,
Mm.
at home while trying to balance everything else in their lives, we became angels. Everyone was, I don't know how you do it. Oh my gosh, this is like, you're amazing. I just tried to do a math lesson with my own kid and I'm ready to quit life. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
we got that like crazy, right? And that
Yeah.
was one parent with one child trying to manage that. And teachers are doing this every single day with 20 plus kids,
Yeah.
various needs, learning styles, etc. But then when we advocated for our own safety, when they wanted us to return in person,
Mm.
how quickly the dime flipped
Yeah.
and how quickly teachers were being called names, in terms of being, lazy, not wanting to go back into work, well, as if it was some vacation, some holiday for us to completely change everything about the way our education system worked on a dime, like that, right? So I think that whole idea of how we treat teachers and the way that we um, hold them up, but also tear them down on the same drive. It's crazy and it's hard to navigate. But that's a rabbit hole. So
Well, but I find it interesting because it sort of leads to something that I know I think about quite a bit, is that as growing up with, or raising Owen how we have, and even Mackenzie as well, the hardest part for us was because, like, a lot of people would tell us, take him to speech, right? Because it can be hard to understand him.
Mhm.
And we did that, but then the speech pathologist would come back and, here's the homework to do, and here's to look for this stuff. And I'm like, what? I have to learn how to do this? I don't like, I out of all the things that I've learned in these 9 years, speech still is like, it is my weakest thing more than anything else. And it's not just, read up a flashcard and say the words, it's how you're saying that word, what part of the tongue are you using? Like, it just goes straight over my, the lack of hair on my head. And I think when the pandemic, kicked in, I find it interesting because I remember saying to, I think it wasn't Siobhan, it was somebody else, that why do I feel like I am, like, you go to work, you come back, and now you're now you're sitting there trying to work through therapies or what have you with your kid, and you're exhausted, and now you have to sit there and go, are they pronouncing the word right?
Mhm.
I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
it's you. Yeah, I'd love to say optimistically that, we're up for the challenge, but after a long day's work, that's hard. And that feeling and it's not that you can go do speech every day. You can't do that. But just having that added responsibility for a parent to go on there, and with a parent that has no background or may not even have any interest in it. I mean, that's a whole other issue, but
Yeah.
that is a heck of a lot of pressure.
Oh yeah.
For a parent to go through, and to see what it was sort of like during the pandemic. I think there are parents that are already out there, ourselves included, where they're just like, yeah, parents have been doing this for a while, and just because our kids have a disability, but other ones that don't have that, and they're trying to learn and trying to see it from a child's point of view of how they're trying to learn something. whole other that's a whole other thing. They're starting from scratch. They don't have the parents, a lot of them don't have the tools, and they don't have the skills, and probably don't have the patience either. Some will be able to step up and figure things out, and they'll want to see from the child's point of view what's going on, which is a whole other issue I have within education itself. But the idea that you can't just teach something at somebody. It's really, you want to teach them in the way that they understand it. And that is, there's a difference between, teachers, that are in that camp versus the ones that are just trying to teach something at somebody. And it's like, what, you don't understand what this means? Well, again, the example I use, and I actually think it was you it might not have been you, but I used it with somebody. But I say this example a lot, which is, how many ways can you figure out how to write the word, horse? You could use it with a pen, you could use blocks, you could write it out with Smarties or M&Ms or chocolate bars. You could use a computer, you could use an iPad, you could use text to speech, and you're all going to end up in the same result. Well, then why, again, for students in general, why, or the school system rather, why are we focusing so hard on having to write something out as opposed to finding a different way that gets the result? Which is a huge, that in itself is a very big shortcoming, and one that I find myself talking more and more people with, and trying to say, Owen thinks like this. This is how it relates to him. Your other way is not going to work. Just won't.
Well, I think too that like thinking back to teaching Owen, and I remember thinking I needed, we were wrapping up a particular science unit. And I was trying to do a final assessment to understand, what pieces he understood and where his stretches still were. And most of my students, they took this assessment and no problem. And I had Owen come with me at a totally different time of the day and sit with me one on one. And I asked him the questions. And if he needed clarification about what the question was asking or needed a visual, I gave that to him.
Yeah.
And then I wrote his answers in quotation marks, because I went, am I trying to assess his ability to print, or am I trying to assess what he understands about this science topic? And so I think being able to pick out the pieces and go, okay, what am I actually trying to assess? What is important for him to understand? And how can he show me what he understands?
Yeah.
Because I think if we keep everybody in this tight box of performance standards, then we're missing out on other ways of understanding and other ways of showing, right? And I remember, and I'm pretty sure it was a conversation that we had where I was getting a lot of feedback from other teachers about scribing for Owen at that time, and writing out his answers for certain things, or having him orally tell me a story, and I would put it on the word processing.
And we should say when scribing is when somebody writes something
For
out
you.
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different, ways to scribe. You can just do it very simply where you're listening and you're just writing what they're saying, or you can do scribing where you would write down what they say, let's say with like a highlighter, and then the child goes over the letters with a pencil. So they're writing it, but they're just tracing, in my opinion. But that's a different thing. But there was a difference in opinion about what was effective. And I just remember a conversation with you where I was like, okay, when we still didn't know that dyslexia was a for sure thing, and we weren't totally sure what was happening there. And we also still didn't have the ASD diagnosis. So all I had to go off was ADHD, and some sensory stuff. And so it was like, okay, we have to figure this out. And I remember, if he would tell me a story and I would write it out for him on paper,
Mhm.
he was unable to copy it into his own journal. But if
Yeah.
I wrote it on word processing and it was digital, he could see the letters more clearly and he could copy it down into his book. So when I'm evaluating that, I go, okay, so looking at what's important for him to know by the end of grade 2,
Yeah.
sure, we want him to be able to print. We want him to be able to spell. We want him to have a really solid, phonetic understanding of the alphabetic code, and we want all these things for him.
Mm.
But if there's these barriers neurologically for him, how can he show up in a way that is strengths based for him
Yeah.
and builds confidence in his ability? So I go, okay, I'm going to listen to the story that he's going to tell me. He's going to understand the criteria that I'm looking for. It needs to have, beginning, middle, end. It needs to have at least one character, whatever I would set as the criteria for him to meet. And then I listen and I assess accordingly. Do I need that story written in his journal to be able to assess whether or not he can formulate a story with a beginning, middle, end, and one character in it? No. So being able to open up how children show what they know
Yeah.
is so important, and really helps them build that confidence and moves them forward in a way that is important. So then when later on, when he did get those additional diagnosis and things like that, it was like, okay, well, this makes sense, and this is why these strategies worked
Yeah.
for helping him along in his literacy and things like that. So so just being open to that, and how we let learners show up, um, and not keeping it in this narrow, well, this is what the performance needs to be only, right? It's what else. can we do?
I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. In the next part, Melissa's going to go into her approach to raising concerns with parents, the process of finding and painting an overall picture of what's going on with the child and understanding how their actions at home and at school fit within each other. Recognizing and making a child's potential the norm, not the exception, and normalizing the behavior and experience to de-stress a child. I also open up about my experience about being held back a grade, why it happened, and what it's done to me.
Thank you for listening to our show.
If you're hearing this message, you've reached the end of the episode, and for that, I want to say thank you. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard and are walking away with newfound knowledge.
We are the ADHD Family.
See you soon for a new episode. I have 3 things to ask of you. Number 1, if you have any comments, questions, or guest ideas, please leave a comment on the Facebook page. Number 2, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people find us. And number 3, if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone who would make a great guest, contact me through our Facebook page. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the host and guest are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated. Any medical information on this site and podcast is provided as an information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient-physician relationship and should not be used as a substitute for a professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or guidance about a specific medical condition. The show, host, and its guests expressly disclaim responsibility and shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained in this site or show. By visiting this site and listening to this show, you agree to the terms and conditions, which may from time to time change or be supplemented by the show host.